You're 24 years old, sitting in your studio apartment eating cereal for dinner because you're too tired to cook, scrolling through your bank account and seeing that familiar number, $2,300. It's not nothing. You're not broke, but it's also not enough. Not enough to feel secure. Not enough to stop checking your balance before buying groceries. Not enough to stop that little voice in your head that whispers you should be further along by now. And the weird part? You're doing everything you're supposed to do. You have a job. You pay your bills. You're not wildly irresponsible. But somehow, money just disappears. And you look at people in their 40s, people who own homes, who take vacations without checking their credit card limit first, who seem to have figured something out, and you wonder what they know that you don't. My name is Rick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly, while others work just as hard and stay stuck in the same financial patterns for decades. And here's what I've learned. The difference between your 20s and your 40s isn't just time. It's not just compound interest or a higher salary or dumb luck. It's something deeper, something most people don't talk about because it sounds too simple or too uncomfortable. The brutal truth is that your 20s and your 40s operate under completely different financial rules. And if you don't understand those rules, you'll waste years fighting battles you were never supposed to win in the first place. This isn't about shaming young people or glorifying middle age. It's about understanding what's actually happening beneath the surface, so you can stop wondering why money feels so impossible right now, or why it suddenly got easier, or why some people seem to skip the struggle entirely. Because once you see the pattern, everything changes. Let's start with the most obvious difference: money coming in. At 25, you might be making $45,000 a year. At 45, maybe you're making $95,000. On paper, that's more than double. You'd think that would solve everything, right? More money, fewer problems. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. Your expenses don't just increase linearly, they multiply. And they multiply in ways that are almost invisible until you're neck deep in them. In your 20s, your life is small. I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean it literally. You probably have a small apartment, maybe a roommate, definitely fewer possessions. You don't own much, you don't need much. Your furniture might be a mix of hand-me-downs and IKEA. Your car, if you have one, is old but functional. You eat cheap meals. You stream everything instead of paying for cable. Your insurance is minimal. Your responsibilities are contained. And yes, money is tight, but the structure of your life is lean. You can, if you need to, survive on very little. By your 40s, that changes completely. You might have a mortgage, let's say $2,200 a month. 2 car payments because now you have a family and you need reliable vehicles. Insurance for the house, the cars, life insurance, umbrella policies, kids, which means daycare, or sports, or tutoring, or college funds. A bigger grocery bill because you're feeding more people and you're tired of eating like a college student. Home repairs, the water heater breaks, the roof needs replacing, the fence falls over in a storm. You're not just paying for more things, you're paying for a more complex life. And that complexity eats money faster than you'd think. Here's the uncomfortable part. People in their 40s often feel just as financially stretched as people in their 20s, even though they're making twice as much. Because the life they've built requires twice as much just to maintain. It's not about being irresponsible or living beyond your means. It's about the fact that adult life, the kind with stability and structure and a place for your kids to grow up, simply costs more. And the gap between income and expenses doesn't disappear. It just shifts. But there's another side to this. In your 20s, every unexpected expense feels catastrophic. A $800 car repair can derail your entire month. You might have to put it on a credit card and spend the next 6 months paying it off. In your 40s, assuming you've built some financial cushion, that same $800 is annoying but manageable. It doesn't break you. And that psychological shift, the shift from panic to inconvenience, is worth more than people realize. It's not that you have more money in your 40s. It's that you have buffer. And buffer changes everything. Let's talk about debt, because this is where the contrast gets really stark. In your 20s, debt feels like this crushing, inescapable weight. Student loans, credit cards, maybe a car loan. You're making minimum payments, watching the interest pile up, feeling like you're running on a treadmill that never stops. You do the math and realize it'll take you 12 years to pay off your loans at this rate, and 12 years feels like forever when you're 26. Here's what makes it worse. In your 20s, you're usually in accumulation mode. You're still building the life you want. You need a car to get to work. You need professional clothes. You need to move to a city with better job opportunities, which means a security deposit and moving costs. You're spending money to create the foundation of your adult life. And that often means taking on more debt before you can even think about paying off the debt you already have. It's not that you're reckless, it's that you're still in the setup phase, and the setup phase is expensive. By your 40s, most people have flipped into reduction mode. You already have the car, you already have the furniture, you already live in the place you're going to live. You're not starting from scratch anymore. And that means your income can finally start attacking debt instead of just treading water. You're making more money, yes, but more importantly, you're not hemorrhaging cash on foundational expenses anymore. The leak has slowed. But here's the thing that really matters. By your 40s, you understand debt differently. In your 20s, debt feels like failure. It feels like you screwed up, like you're behind, like everyone else has it figured out and you're the only one drowning. In your 40s, you realize debt is just a tool. It's not moral or immoral. It's not good or bad. It's just a financial instrument with a cost. And once you stop being emotional about it, you can be strategic about it. You refinance. You prioritize high-interest debt. You use balance transfers. You treat it like a problem to solve, not a character flaw to hide. The psychological difference is massive. And honestly, that shift in mindset might matter more than the actual dollars you're throwing at the debt. Okay, let's talk about the thing that everyone mentions, but almost nobody truly feels until it's too late, or just in time, depending on your perspective. Compound interest. I know. You've heard it 1,000 times. Save early. Let it grow. Exponential returns. Blah, blah, blah. But here's why it actually matters in the context of 20s versus 40s. It's not just about the math. It's about time and momentum. In your 20s, you have time. Like an absurd amount of time. If you're 25 and you start investing $300 a month, by the time you're 65, assuming a 7% average annual return, you'll have around $750,000. That's 40 years of compounding doing the heavy lifting for you. If you wait until you're 40 to start investing that same $300 a month, you'll end up with around $225,000. Still decent, but a third of what you'd have if you'd started 15 years earlier. The 15-year delay costs you over $500,000. That's the math everyone talks about. But here's the part they don't talk about. In your 20s, $300 a month feels impossible. You're making $45,000 a year. After taxes, after rent, after student loans, after trying to have any semblance of a social life so you don't become a hermit, $300 a month might as well be $3,000 a month. It's not that you don't want to invest. It's that you're trying to survive. You're trying to build an emergency fund. You're trying to stop living paycheck to paycheck. Telling someone in their 20s to invest for retirement when they can't afford a $500 emergency is like telling someone who's drowning to think about their swim technique. It's technically correct advice, but it misses the reality of the moment. By your 40s, $300 a month is easier to find. You're making more. Your expenses, while higher, are more predictable. You've maybe paid off some debt. You have systems in place. And so you start investing, not because you suddenly became more disciplined, but because you finally have the margin to do it. But now you've lost the compounding advantage. You're playing catch up. And catch up in your 40s means you need to invest more, maybe $800 or $1,000 a month, to get to the same place you would have gotten to with $300 a month in your 20s. It's a cruel irony. When you have the time, you don't have the money. When you have the money, you don't have the time. And the people who win this game are the ones who figure out how to scrape together something, even $50 or $100 a month in their 20s, just to get the clock ticking. Because once the compounding starts, it takes care of itself. But if you wait, you're basically signing up to work harder later to make up for the inertia you lost early. Here's something nobody talks about. In your 20s, you're constantly spending money on figuring things out. You're trying different careers, different cities, different relationships, different versions of yourself. And all of that experimentation costs money. You take a job that pays less because it's in a field you think you want to be in. You move across the country for an opportunity that doesn't pan out. You go back to school. You start a side hustle that fizzles. You're in discovery mode, and discovery is expensive. By your 40s, you've mostly figured it out. You know what career you're in. You know what city you're living in. You know what kind of life you want. You're not experimenting anymore. You're executing. And execution is way cheaper than experimentation. You're not moving every 2 years. You're not switching industries. You're not starting over. You're building on what you've already built. And that creates a kind of invisible savings that doesn't show up in any budget spreadsheet. Think about it. How much money did you waste in your 20s on things that didn't work out? The gym membership you used twice. The online course you never finished. The furniture you bought and then abandoned when you moved. The career pivot that cost you 6 months of income. None of those were bad decisions at the time. They were necessary parts of figuring out who you are and what you want. But they're also sunk costs. Money you'll never get back. In your 40s, you're done with most of that. You know you're not going to become a yoga instructor or move to Portland or start a food truck. You've settled into yourself. And that clarity saves you a staggering amount of money, not because you're more disciplined, but because you're no longer funding your own identity crisis. Let's talk about something that doesn't get mentioned enough: energy. Physical, mental, emotional energy. In your 20s, you have so much energy. You can work a full-time job, do a side hustle, go out with friends, stay up late, wake up early, and do it all over again the next day. Your body doesn't punish you for it, at least not immediately. And that energy is a form of wealth. It lets you hustle in ways that aren't sustainable long-term, but can accelerate your financial trajectory in the short term. You can take the second job. You can do the freelance gig on weekends. You can drive for Uber after your shift ends. You can grind, basically, and your body keeps up. And for a lot of people in their 20s, that hustle is the difference between staying afloat and going under. You can't out-earn your problems yet through career growth alone, so you outwork them through sheer volume. By your 40s, that energy is gone. Or at least, it's significantly diminished. You get tired more easily. You need more sleep. Your back hurts. You can't pull all-nighters without paying for it for days afterward. And if you have kids, forget about it. You're already exhausted just from the baseline demands of parenting. The idea of working a side hustle on top of everything else sounds less like opportunity and more like torture. But here's the flip side. In your 40s, you don't need the hustle as much. Your main income has, hopefully, grown to the point where you're not constantly scrambling. You're earning more per hour than you were in your 20s, so you don't need to work as many hours to achieve the same financial outcome. You've traded volume for value, and that trade only works because you've spent years building skills, experience, and credibility that let you command higher pay. The energy economy flips. In your 20s, you're energy rich and cash poor, so you convert energy into cash. In your 40s, you're energy poor and, hopefully, cash rich, so you protect your energy and focus on efficiency. Neither is better or worse. They're just different phases of the same game. But if you try to play your 40s like your 20s, you'll burn out. And if you try to play your 20s like your 40s, you'll stay broke. In your 20s, you can take risks that would be insane in your 40s. You can quit your job and move to another city with $2,000 in your bank account because, worst case, you move back in with your parents or crash on a friend's couch. You can start a business with no safety net because you don't have a mortgage or kids or anyone depending on you. You can say yes to opportunities that make no financial sense in the short term because you have time to recover if they don't work out. And that risk tolerance, that freedom to fail, is one of the most underrated financial advantages of being young. You can afford to make big bets because the downside is survivable. Yeah, it'll suck if it doesn't work out, but you'll be fine. You'll rebuild. You'll try again. By your 40s, the stakes are different. You have a family. You have a house. You have responsibilities that can't be paused or put on hold. The idea of quitting your job to start a business sounds less like adventure and more like recklessness. Because if it fails, it's not just you who suffers. It's your spouse, your kids, everyone who depends on you. The downside is no longer just uncomfortable, it's catastrophic. So people in their 40s play it safe. They stay in jobs they hate because the paycheck is reliable. They don't take swings. They optimize for stability over growth. And that's not cowardice, it's responsibility. But it's also a trap, because the only way to create real wealth is to take some level of risk, and by your 40s, the window for risk has narrowed significantly. The people who win are the ones who take smart risks in their 20s, when failure is cheap, and then leverage the results of those risks in their 40s, when stability is expensive. But if you spend your 20s playing it safe, you miss the window. And if you spend your 40s taking reckless risks, you endanger everything you've built. Here's the secret advantage of being in your 40s. You've seen this movie before. You've lived through recessions, market crashes, job losses, financial mistakes. You've made every dumb money decision there is to make, and you've learned from it. You know what works and what doesn't, not because you read it in a book, but because you lived it. In your 20s, everything feels high stakes and urgent because you don't have context. You don't know if this is normal or if you're failing. You see your friends buying houses and you panic, thinking you're behind. You see someone get promoted and you spiral, wondering why it's not happening for you. You're constantly comparing yourself to everyone else because you don't have an internal reference point yet. By your 40s, you've developed that reference point. You know that some years are good and some years are hard, and it all evens out eventually. You know that the people who looked like they had it all figured out in their 20s were often just faking it, or got lucky, or are now divorced and broke. You've learned that wealth is built slowly, over decades, through boring consistency, not through dramatic wins. and that knowledge makes you calm. You stop panicking. You stop comparing. You just focus on your own path, and that calmness, that perspective, is worth more than any amount of money. Because when you're calm, you make better decisions. You don't chase get-rich-quick schemes. You don't panic sell during market downturns. You don't make emotional financial choices. You just stick to the plan, trust the process, and let time do its thing. Here's the part that ties it all together. There's an inflection point that happens somewhere between your 20s and your 40s, where wealth stops being about survival and starts being about accumulation. In your 20s, you're trying not to drown. Every dollar is spoken for. Every financial decision is about keeping your head above water. You're in defense mode. By your 40s, if you've done things even reasonably well, you've crossed into offense mode. You have an emergency fund. You have equity in your home. You have retirement accounts that are actually growing. You're not worried about making rent. You're worried about optimizing your tax strategy. The game has completely changed. And here's the brutal truth. Some people never make that transition. They stay in defense mode their entire lives, paycheck to paycheck, crisis to crisis, never building momentum, and it's not always because they're bad with money. Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes it's systemic barriers. Sometimes it's a series of small mistakes that compound into big consequences. But often, it's because they didn't understand the rules of the game they were playing. They spent their 20s like they were in their 40s, playing it safe, avoiding risk, optimizing for comfort instead of growth. And they spent their 40s like they were in their 20s, still figuring it out, still experimenting, still without a plan. The people who win understand that your 20s and your 40s require different strategies. Your 20s are about building foundation, taking risks, and maximizing your time advantage even when you don't have much money. Your 40s are about leveraging what you've built, protecting what you have, and using your higher income to accelerate wealth accumulation. You can't skip one to get to the other, and you can't play them the same way. So where does that leave you? Whether you're in your 20s reading this and feeling overwhelmed, or in your 40s reading this and feeling behind, here's what I want you to take away. Financial success isn't about being perfect. It's about understanding where you are and playing the game you're actually in, not the game you wish you were in. If you're in your 20s, stop beating yourself up for not having it all figured out. You're not supposed to. Your job right now is to survive, learn, build skills, and invest whatever you can, even if it's $50 a month. The goal isn't to be rich at 25. The goal is to set yourself up so that by 45, you're not starting from zero. If you're in your 40s and you feel behind, stop wasting energy on regret. You can't get your 20s back, but you still have 20 or 30 years to build wealth, and you now have something you didn't have before: knowledge, income, and perspective. Use them. Be strategic. Focus on what you can control. The brutal truth about your 20s versus your 40s isn't that one is better than the other. It's that they're different. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop fighting against the reality of where you are and start leveraging it. Your 20s give you time and energy. Your 40s give you money and wisdom. Both are valuable. Both are necessary. And the people who build real wealth are the ones who use each decade for what it's actually good for.